My name is Margaret Hale, and I'm 66 years old. The day my grandson laughed at my shoes was the day I realized I'd become invisible in my own family. It started like any ordinary Sunday. I'd woken before dawn, the way I always do, kneading dough for biscuits while the radio murmured an old country song in the kitchen. Outside, the street was quiet except for the low hum of sprinklers and a dog barking somewhere down the block. By 8:30 I'd packed a basket with peach cobbler, biscuits, and a jar of honey from the farmer's market. I wanted to surprise my daughter, Linda, and my grandson, Jason. Their house sits high on the ridge, 3 stories of glass and pale stone beautiful, but so polished it almost feels afraid of fingerprints. When I rang the bell, Jason's music thudded through the door, heavy with bass. Linda answered, bright and rushed, phone wedged between her ear and shoulder. "Mom, come in, sorry, conference call, just a sec." She mouthed "love you" and disappeared toward her office. Jason was in the living room with 2 friends. The big television glowed with a racing game. Virtual engines roared while snack wrappers littered the table. He looked up, eyes flicking over me the way you glance at a stranger who's walked into the wrong room. Then his gaze dropped to my feet. "Grandma," he said slowly, voice already sliding into laughter. "What are those? Time travel shoes?" His friends snorted. Jason lifted one of my feet with a finger like he was inspecting an exhibit. "Seriously, you wear these in public?" The shoes were old brown loafers, soft leather, scuffed at the toes, the same pair Robert, my late husband, had given me for our 25th anniversary. They'd carried me through decades, hospital corridors when Linda was born, rainy sidewalks to my first job at the library, endless errands for a little boy who used to call me his hero. I smiled because it was easier than showing how the joke landed. "They're comfortable, sweetheart," I said. "You'll understand when your knees start arguing with you." He rolled his eyes. "By then I'll have self-driving sneakers." The boys laughed again. My cheeks warmed, and for a moment I wished I'd stayed home. But I placed the cobbler on the table and said lightly, "Dessert for you young gentlemen. Don't worry, it's from this century." Linda reappeared, phone finally down. "Jason, manners." He shrugged, muttered something like "just teasing," and turned back to his game. We ate together later, or rather, I watched them eat. Jason talked about the sports car he planned to buy, a silver convertible, because matte black is too common. He explained horsepower, exhaust systems, something about 0 to 60. I nodded, lost, but he didn't notice. He never looked up from his phone. I wanted to tell him about the little victories of my week, the elderly couple who'd found their wedding china at the thrift store. The way the gardenias had bloomed early, but every time I tried to speak, his music or his scrolling interrupted. After dinner, Linda packed leftovers for me. "Ignore him," she whispered, embarrassed. "He's just showing off." I smiled, assuring her I wasn't hurt. But when Jason called after me, "Next time I'll buy you some real shoes, Grandma," his laughter chased me out the door like a cold wind. The evening air smelled of rain and cut grass. I stood on their porch for a moment, clutching the warm container of leftovers, listening to the muffled music inside. My reflection stared back from the glass door, gray hair escaping my bun, cardigan a size too big, those ancient shoes dark against the polished floor. For the first time, I saw what he must have seen, not the woman who raised him, but an old photograph left too long in the Sunday. The bus stop sat 3 blocks away. With every step, the hurt settled deeper, heavy as the groceries in my arms. The city lights, blurred through the drizzle, and the sound of tires on wet pavement reminded me of Robert driving home from late shifts, headlights cutting through fog. He'd walk in smelling of motor oil and peppermint gum, pull me close, and say, "Don't ever trade comfort for show, Maggie. You can polish pride, but it still creaks when it's empty." By the time I reached my little house, the cobbler had cooled. I set it on the counter untouched. The ticking clock filled the silence. It sounded like disapproval. I sat in Robert's old chair by the window, the one with the worn armrest where his elbow used to rest. The garden outside glistened under the porch light. I could almost see him kneeling among the rose bushes, whistling off-key. The memory softened me. Maybe I expect too much. I whispered to the quiet. He's young, the world runs too fast now. But another voice inside answered, no, respect doesn't go out of style. I slipped off the loafers and studied them. The stitching frayed near the heel, the leather cracked where my foot bends. I should have felt embarrassed, but instead I felt proud. These shoes had outlasted storms, funerals, and long bus rides to keep food on a table Jason once ate at without manners or complaints. On the nightstand sat my journal. I opened it and wrote, "He laughed at my shoes today." The words looked small, almost silly. Yet as I stared at them, they grew heavier. He laughed, and I stayed silent. I underlined the last phrase twice. When I closed the notebook, the hurt hadn't left, but something steadier had taken root beneath it, a quiet resolve. The kind Robert used to call my backbone in a dress. I washed the dishes, turned off the lights, and paused at the doorway before heading to bed. My shoes waited neatly by the mat, damp from the rain but faithful as ever. I smiled at them and said, "We've got a few miles left in us, don't we?" Outside, thunder muttered somewhere beyond the hills, a promise, rather, than a threat. I couldn't know that before long those same shoes would walk me straight into the lesson my grandson needed most. Because the woman he mocked for her shoes wasn't done walking yet, and every step ahead would echo louder than his laughter. Respect doesn't disappear in a single moment. It slips away a little at a time until you wake one morning and can't remember when people stopped listening to you. The morning after Jason's remark, sunlight spilled across my kitchen like an apology. It made the dust on the table sparkle, the way flaws sometimes do when light insists on finding them. I poured coffee, sat down, and tried to make peace with the quiet. But silence has a way of echoing back the words you most want to forget, and all I could hear was Jason's laughter. I told myself not to be dramatic, kids have sharp tongues. That's all, but hurt has its own stubborn logic. It nests somewhere between pride and love, and you can't reason it away. I looked at Robert's photograph on the counter, his grin, that speck of paint on his cheek from the day he built this kitchen. "You'd have scolded him gently," I said aloud. "You always knew how to make people listen without raising your voice." I pulled on my coat, the one with fraying cuffs, and slid my feet into the same brown loafers. They looked older in the morning light, but they were steady under me. I locked the door and walked toward the bus stop. Each step on the damp pavement whispered the same rhythm. Keep your dignity. By the time I reached the thrift store, I'd forced a smile onto my face. The bell over the door chimed its usual tinny welcome. Shelves waited for me to dust. Hangers squeaked as customers flipped through racks. Ordinary sounds, ordinary day, comforting in their sameness. "Morning, sunshine," Nina called from behind the counter. She was arranging costume jewelry, her red hair caught up in a messy bun. "You look like you wrestled a daughter, thundercloud." "Just didn't sleep much," I said. Nina peered at me over her glasses. "Family?" I laughed softly. "Always." We opened the shop together. A young mother bought children's books. An old man haggled over a lamp he clearly didn't need. Normal life, simple and human. I love the thrift store for that reason. It reminds me that value isn't always printed on a tag. Around noon, I took my lunch outside. A sandwich, an apple, the usual. Habit made me pull out my phone. I shouldn't have. There, glowing on the screen, was Jason's latest post, a picture of a dusty shelf labeled vintage footwear, captioned, "Grandma's Boutique Number Throwback Fashion." The laugh that had stung yesterday felt sharper in print. Strangers joined in the joke, one comment after another piling on like stones. For a second the world blurred. My apple slipped from my hand and rolled into the gutter. I locked the phone and stared at my reflection in the shop window. The woman looking back wasn't sad exactly, just tired of being the punchline. When I went inside, Nina noticed immediately. "What happened?" "Nothing that coffee won't fix." I lied. She gave me the kind of look women give when they've been there themselves but let it go. The afternoon dragged. Every squeak of the register felt louder than usual. When the last customer left, Nina flipped the sign to closed and said, "Come on, diner across the street, my treat." We sat in a corner booth bathed in pink neon. The waitress poured coffee that tasted faintly of metal. But warmth is warmth. Kids think they're immortal, Nina said. They laugh because they don't know how fragile pride can be. I stirred sugar into my cup. He used to be sweet. He'd pick dandelions for me and call them roses. He'll come around. Life always cashes the checks, arrogance writes. I smiled at that. You sound like Robert. Nina winked. Then he must have been right, often. That night, back home, I wrote in my journal again. Today I was invisible. Tomorrow I will choose grace. The words steadied me. Still, a smaller sentence crept below it before I closed the book. And if grace doesn't reach him, perhaps life will. Thunder grumbled outside, slow and distant. Rain began tapping at the window, the same gentle rhythm that used to lull Robert to sleep. I watched droplets race each other down the glass, tiny mirrors carrying the streetlights upside down. The house felt both lonely and peaceful, like it was waiting for something. By the door, my shoes sat neatly side by side. I bent to wipe away a faint smear of mud. We'll keep walking, won't we? I whispered. The silence that answered wasn't empty, it was patient. I thought about Jason again, about how quickly the world he lived in moved, how little time it left for gratitude. Somewhere between his first cell phone and his first car commercial, he'd forgotten that worth and wealth are two very different things. I turned off the lamp, let the darkness settle. The rain softened to a whisper, a lullaby for old regrets. Before sleep claimed me, I made a quiet promise to myself and to Robert's memory. I wouldn't let bitterness root in my heart. But I also wouldn't let Jason's mockery be the last chapter of our story. Because silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's the sound of strength gathering itself for the road ahead. Sometimes the people who change your story don't arrive with trumpets. They just step through a doorway looking for something ordinary. It was a Tuesday, quiet, the kind of day when sunlight slants through the display window and dust dances in it like slow music. Nina was in back sorting coats, and I was humming to myself as I rearranged a shelf of mismatched teacups. The bell over the door jingled, and in walked a man who looked out of place among the clutter. He was tall, silver-haired, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit too perfectly for second-hand shopping. Yet he didn't carry the air of someone slumming for novelty. He moved slowly, respectfully, as if every shelf deserved attention. "Good morning," I said, brushing my hands on my apron. "Good morning," he replied, voice low and pleasant. "I'm looking for something with a bit of age to it. Something that's already lived a little." I smiled. "Then you're in the right museum." That earned a laugh, soft, genuine. He told me his name was Daniel Clarke. He was decorating an office, he said, but not in the usual sleek glass style. He wanted pieces with stories. "Well," I said, leading him to the corner where we kept antiques, "every scratch here has a memory behind it. You just have to decide which memories you'd like to borrow." He bent to study an old typewriter, fingers hovering above the keys. "This one looks like it still remembers deadlines," he said. "You'd be surprised how many letters of love and resignation went through that thing," I answered. He smiled, eyes crinkling. "Then it's perfect." While he browsed, I found myself watching the way he treated the items, careful hands, no rush. Most customers pawed through things as though time itself were cheap. Daniel handled them as if time were sacred. He paid with cash and dropped a 20 into the donation jar. "For the stories," he said, nodding toward the shelves. Then he added, "Do you work here every day, Mrs. Hale?" I supplied. "Margaret Hale, and yes, most days. Keeps me out of trouble." "Then I'll see you again," he said, and walked out carrying the typewriter like treasure. When the door closed, Nina popped her head out. "Was that a movie star or what?" "Just a customer," I said. But my cheeks were warm. Not from flattery he hadn't flirted, but from the simple shock of being spoken to with respect. He did come back, the following Thursday, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a box of old picture frames he wanted to donate. From then on it became a ritual. Thursday afternoons, coffee, conversation. He'd ask about my garden, about the town's history. Sometimes we'd talk about books. Once, I asked why he cared so much about secondhand things. He said, Because new objects are silent, old ones still have something to say. The line stayed with me all day. Over those weeks, I learned pieces of his story. A widower, like me, a businessman who owned several car dealerships but disliked the pretension of that world. He preferred community work scholarships, charity drives. I told him about Jason, though carefully. He's smart, I said. Just lost in the noise of shiny things. Daniel nodded. That age confuses success with applause. Don't worry, life eventually quiets the crowd. One Saturday near closing, the familiar rumble of engines filled the parking lot. I looked up and my heart stumbled. Jason and his friends had parked outside, posing beside their cars, music blaring. They laughed loudly, each one trying to outshine the other. Through the window, I saw Daniel's SUV pulling in from the other side. He was unloading donations for our charity drive. I felt panic rise, two worlds about to collide. Jason didn't notice me. He leaned against his shiny car, bragging to the boys. Next week I'm buying the new model from Clarke Automotive, he said proudly. They treat me like royalty there. Daniel paused mid-unloading, recognizing his own name. He glanced toward the boys with mild amusement before carrying his boxes inside. Looks lively out there, he said as the bell rang behind him. Too lively, I murmured. He followed my gaze to the window. Friends of yours? I hesitated. Family? Understanding dawned in his eyes, gentle but sharp. Ah, he said simply. Then you must be very proud and occasionally exhausted. I couldn't help but laugh. Something like that. He smiled and changed the subject, but I caught the flicker of thought behind his expression, the kind you file away quietly for later. When Jason's group finally roared off down the street, Daniel turned to me and said, He's buying from my dealership, isn't he? I blinked. Your dealership? Clarke Automotive, he confirmed. Small world. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the coincidence. Then you'll probably meet him soon enough, I said. Though I'd rather he didn't know we were acquainted. He might die of embarrassment, Daniel chuckled. I'll keep our secret, Mrs. Hale. But perhaps there's a lesson waiting for him. There's something even a dealership can't sell. He said it lightly, yet something about his tone made me shiver, not with fear, but with the strange certainty that fate had just pulled a chair up to our table. I didn't realize it that afternoon, but the man who treated second-hand things with reverence was about to handle my grandson's pride the same way, carefully. And with purpose. Life has a strange sense of timing. It waits until you've almost stopped hoping, then throws everyone you love into the same room just to see what happens. It was a gray Saturday morning when our two worlds finally met. The thrift store had closed early for a community drive, and Daniel had invited me to visit one of his dealerships afterward. Come see what old junk money gets recycled into, he'd joked. I almost declined. Polished showrooms weren't my comfort zone, but curiosity nudged me forward. The building gleamed like a mirror of chrome and glass. Cars lined the lot in perfect rows, shining so brightly they almost looked smug. Inside, the air smelled of new leather and expensive coffee. I felt out of place immediately. My cardigan and loafers looked like relics among tailored suits. Daniel met me near the entrance, warmth cutting through all the luxury. Mrs. Hale, you came. I said I would, I smiled, still adjusting to the brightness. He led me through the showroom, explaining how each sale helped fund scholarships and the shelter's van repairs. I like money best when it's busy doing good, he said. I admired that about him. People with power rarely remembered what generosity looked like. We were standing near a silver convertible when the automatic doors hissed open behind us. I didn't have to turn to know that, laugh the careless show-me one Jason had perfected. He strode in with two friends, all swagger and cologne, and called out, "Where's the manager?" "I'm here for the test drive on the V6 Limited." Daniel's brows lifted in quiet amusement. "That would be me," he said. Daniel Clarke. Jason froze mid-sentence. You? I thought, I talked to someone else on the phone. Yes, you did, Daniel said easily. But I like to meet our young customers myself. It's good to know the people chasing horsepower. Jason laughed awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. Cool, yeah, that's me. He didn't notice me yet. I was standing half hidden beside a display of keychains. Daniel continued his gentle interrogation, questions about income, maintenance, insurance. Jason's confidence wavered with each answer. Still, he managed to flash his grin. My mom's helping with the loan. My grandma's got property too. We're good. My heart clenched. It wasn't the boasting, it was hearing myself used as currency. Daniel nodded politely. Always good to have family support. Then, turning slightly toward me, he said, Mrs. Hale, why don't you come over here for a moment? Jason's head snapped up. When his eyes found me, the color drained from his face. Grandma? Hello, Jason. I kept my tone calm, almost cheerful, though my pulse drummed in my ears. He blinked rapidly, then forced a laugh. What are you doing here? Visiting a friend. Daniel answered before I could. Mrs. Hale and I work together on community projects. Jason's mouth opened, closed, opened again. His friends had drifted toward the exit, sensing the storm. Community projects? He echoed, voice cracking slightly. Daniel smiled. Yes. She's one of our private donors. I nearly protested, but Daniel's slight shake of the head stopped me. The words hung in the air. Private donor. I could see them sink into Jason's mind, confusion chasing embarrassment. For once, his practiced grin failed him. I stepped closer to the car he wanted, running my hand along the smooth metal. It's a fine machine, I said. A bit louder than I'd like, but then again, some people mistake noise for importance. Daniel suppressed a smile. Jason stared at the floor. The sales staff, sensing something unusual, lingered discreetly. Daniel guided the moment like a conductor, never cruel, never mocking, just letting silence do the heavy lifting. After a long pause, he said, Jason, we take character references seriously here. If Mrs. Hale recommends you, the sale will move quickly. Jason looked at me. Mortified. You don't have to, it's just paperwork, right? It's also reputation, Daniel replied softly. When a man drives one of my cars, he represents more than himself. He represents everyone who believes in him. Jason swallowed hard. His arrogance was slipping, inch by inch. I could have stepped in, spared him, but I didn't. I remembered the laughter, the post online, the ease with which he'd turned me into a joke. This wasn't revenge, it was truth finally being heard. I'll think about it, I said. If you can promise me you'll drive carefully, not just on the road, but through life. He met my eyes, realizing there was no escape hatch here. Yes, ma'am, he said quietly. Daniel handed him a business card. Bring your paperwork tomorrow, we'll finish then. Jason nodded, mumbled a goodbye, and all but ran out of the showroom. The silence that followed felt heavier than the gleaming car beside us. I exhaled slowly. You didn't have to do that. I didn't, Daniel said. Fate did. I just opened the door. I looked at him, half amused, half grateful. You're quite the teacher. He shook his head. No, the lesson belongs to you. I merely scheduled the class. We both laughed then, the tension dissolving. Outside, Jason's car engine roared as he sped away, loud, defensive, the sound of pride trying to escape its own echo. Daniel turned to me. He'll come back. Pride always stalls on the road to wisdom. I smiled. And when he does? Then we'll see how fast humility can drive. My grandson left that showroom red-faced and silent, but he'd just taken the first turn toward the lesson he didn't know he needed. And I had no idea how far that road would carry us both. Revenge feels good for a moment, but lessons built on kindness last a lifetime. That night I sat at my kitchen table, replaying the scene at the dealership. Jason's stunned face hovered behind my eyelids like a photograph caught in flash. For the first time in years, he'd been speechless, not from fear, but from realization. Still, guilt pricked at me. I hadn't meant to humiliate him. I only wanted him to see. The phone rang. Daniel's voice carried a smile. Mrs. Hale, I hope I didn't overstep today. You didn't, I said. You just held up a mirror. Sometimes that's the only way to make someone look. He hesitated. He's a bright young man. Arrogant, yes, but not hopeless. I think there's a lesson still waiting for him if you'll allow me to help. What kind of lesson? I asked, wary but curious. One built on compassion, he replied. A chance for him to earn respect instead of demand it. The next morning, I met Daniel at his office. Behind him, floor-to-ceiling windows, framed rows of cars glinting in sunlight. He poured coffee for both of us and unfolded his idea, a small test, disguised as opportunity. I'm starting a sponsorship program, he explained. We highlight responsible young drivers and involve them in charity work. If Jason joins, he'll still get his car, but only after proving he can represent more than his ego. I studied Daniel's face. There was no hint of malice, only patient resolve. And you want me involved? You'll be part of the evaluation panel. Silent partner, remember? He said with a wink. We'll let him think you're reviewing applicants with me. I laughed softly. You're sneaky, Mr. Clarke. Strategic, he corrected. And I'd rather guide than punish. I nodded. The plan felt right, not vindictive, just fair. Maybe this was how Robert would have handled it. That afternoon, I walked to Linda's house, nervous but determined. She answered in yoga pants and a frazzled bun, relief flooding her face when she saw me. Mom, Jason told me about the dealership. What was that? An accident that might become a blessing, I said gently. She sighed. He's embarrassed, but maybe that's good for him. He needs to learn. Then let's help him, I said, outlining Daniel's program. By the end, she was smiling. You and Mr. Clarke sound like partners in crime. Partners in kindness, I corrected. When Jason came home later, I stayed for dinner. He was quieter than usual, poking at his food. Finally, he muttered. Grandma, I didn't mean to make you look bad. You didn't, I said. You made yourself look young and that's curable. He half smiled, unsure if it was safe to laugh. Mr. Clarke told me about some sponsorship thing. Think I should try? That depends, I said, meeting his eyes. Are you ready to be seen for who you are, not what you buy? He shrugged. Guess we'll find out. The following week, we sat across from each other in Daniel's office, Jason on one side. Suit jacket borrowed from his friend, me and Daniel on the other, pretending professionalism. Daniel conducted the interview like an orchestra conductor. Questions about responsibility, community, integrity. Jason stumbled through some, nailed others. I watched his bravado chip away as he realized this wasn't about engines or chrome. It was about character. When it ended, Daniel extended his hand. You did well. But there's one final condition before we approve your sponsorship. Jason straightened. Anything. You'll spend 1 month volunteering with Mrs. Hale at the thrift store. It's part of the outreach requirement. Jason blinked. Wait, what? The thrift store? I kept my tone mild. You'll learn more there about value than any showroom could teach. He looked from me to Daniel and back again. Then exhaled. 1 month. Daniel smiled. Good. I think you'll find humility comes with surprisingly good mileage. Later, as we walked to my car, Jason muttered, You planned this, didn't you? Fate did, I said, echoing Daniel's words. We just opened the door. He rolled his eyes but didn't argue. That was progress. At home that night, I wrote in my journal, Kindness is not weakness, it's wisdom disguised as mercy. The rain had started again, tapping against the window like applause from the heavens. My shoes, drying by the door, looked older than ever but proud somehow, as if they knew this road was theirs to finish. He thought the lesson would end with a signature on a contract, but kindness had just taken the wheel and it was steering him somewhere he never expected. Pride will always sign the contract before reading the fine print. Jason showed up at the thrift store the following Monday morning. I saw him through the front window, first hair carefully styled, sunglasses even. Though the day was cloudy, a crisp white shirt that clearly didn't belong anywhere near donation bins. He paused outside, staring at the hand-painted Second Chance thrift store sign as if it were written in another language. Then he squared his shoulders and came in. "Morning," I said, pretending surprise. He looked around the cluttered space, nose wrinkling at the faint smell of old books and lemon cleaner. "So, this is it?" "This," I replied, handing him an apron, "is humility in retail form. You'll get used to it." He muttered something about hazard pay, but tied the apron anyway. For the first half hour he stood behind the counter, tapping his phone whenever he thought I wasn't looking. Nina caught my eye and smirked. "Your new trainee's allergic to dust," she whispered. "Give him time," I murmured back. "Some lessons start with sneezing." Eventually, I sent him to the back room to sort donated shoes. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. He stared at the mountains of footwear, heels, boots, sneakers, and sighed. "You're kidding, right? Every pair has a story," I said. "Treat them kindly, they carried someone farther than you think." He rolled his eyes but started sorting. By closing time, his immaculate shirt had a gray streak across the pocket and his hair had lost the war. He didn't smile once, but he didn't quit either. The next few days followed the same rhythm. He worked, complained less each time, and even began talking to customers. I watched him quietly as he helped a young mother find shoes for her son's first day of school. When the boy tried them on, Jason crouched to tie the laces without prompting. The mother's smile was thanks enough, but I saw something flicker in Jason's eyes, a small, startled warmth. Still, pride dies slow. On Friday, he announced, "Mr. Clarke called. He wants me to come by the dealership tomorrow. Says he's got a surprise for me." "Oh," I said, feigning indifference. "Maybe he's ready to finalize the sponsorship," Jason guessed. "Guess I passed your boot camp." I smiled. Maybe the test isn't finished yet." Saturday dawned bright and cold. I arrived at the dealership a few minutes before Jason, greeted by Daniel's easy grin. "Ready for Act 2?" he asked. "Ready," I said. "But go easy on him. He's starting to find his footing." Daniel chuckled. "I promise mercy, just not immunity." When Jason walked in, his swagger had returned. "Morning, Mr. Clarke. Heard you've got good news." Daniel clasped his hands behind his back. "Possibly. Our sponsorship committee was impressed, especially your supervisor." He nodded toward me. Jason glanced my way, cheeks coloring. "Yeah, well, I did my part." Daniel gestured toward a gleaming car under a silk cover. "Before we unveil anything, there's paperwork. We need one more co-signer, our silent investor. She prefers to meet every candidate personally." Jason perked up. "Investor? Cool." Daniel smiled slightly. "You'll see." He pressed a button. The showroom doors opened and I stepped through. Jason's expression went from excitement to disbelief. "Grandma?" "Mrs. Hale," Daniel said smoothly, "is the silent investor." Jason blinked at him, then at me. "You're kidding." I folded my hands. "I'm afraid not," Daniel motioned to the paperwork on the table. "Her signature finalizes your deal." Jason stared at the forms, then back at me. "So, what happens if you don't sign?" "Then," I said gently, "you'll have to earn it some other way." He hesitated, caught between frustration and understanding. "What do you want me to do?" "Just listen," I replied. I walked around the covered car, fingertips brushing the smooth fabric. "You've worked hard this month. I've seen you helping others. Not for applause, but because it felt right. That's the person I'll sign for the one who ties a child's shoe without thinking he's too important to kneel." Jason swallowed. The pride in his posture melted into something softer. "I didn't realize how much I had until I saw how little some people get," he said quietly. "Guess that's the point." "Huh?" Daniel smiled. "Exactly." I nodded. "Then you're ready." I signed the last line. Daniel whipped away the silk cover. The car gleamed, silver and flawless, the reflection of all three of us caught in its surface. Jason ran a hand over the hood, awe softening his face. It's beautiful, he whispered. It's yours, Daniel said. But remember, every mile is a promise. Keep your word to the people who believed in you. Jason looked at me. I will, Grandma. I swear. We drove home together, the new car humming beneath us. Halfway down Main Street, he glanced at my worn loafers and grinned shyly. You know, he said, these seats are leather. I could buy you a pair to match. I laughed. Thank you. But these have more miles left than you think. He chuckled, eyes on the road. Guess some things don't need replacing. No, I said softly, watching the town roll by. Some things just need remembering. He thought the deal was just about a car. But what he drove away with was worth far more, and the road ahead was only beginning to teach him how to stay humble. Sometimes the sweetest victories come wrapped in quiet smiles. The next morning, the dealership parking lot shimmered under a high blue sky. Jason was already there when I arrived, leaning against his new car, sunglasses on, pretending not to preen but failing miserably. The sunlight made the paint sparkle. He looked like pride on 4 wheels. Morning, Grandma, he called. Voice light, almost nervous. Morning, Jason. I see the car suits you, he grinned. It's more than a car, it's freedom. Daniel appeared from inside, immaculate as ever. Freedom is only as good as the driver behind the wheel, he said, clapping Jason on the shoulder. Ready for your orientation? Jason nodded eagerly. I followed them into the showroom, pretending to browse. Daniel led him through paperwork, insurance details, sponsorship clauses, each line reminding Jason that privilege carried weight. He signed with exaggerated care, the pen trembling slightly between fingers unused to responsibility. When the final signature dried, Daniel gestured toward me. There's one last thing. We like to mark the start of our mentorships with a photo for our community board. Mrs. Hale always joins, she's part of our story here. Jason blinked. You're serious? My grandma's going on the dealership wall? I'd be honored, I said, standing beside him. Smile, dear, it's good practice. The camera flashed. For an instant I saw him as a little boy again, squinting, shoulders hunched, pretending annoyance while secretly enjoying the attention. Afterward, Daniel said, we also do a brief introduction to staff so everyone knows who our sponsored driver is. He called the employees together. Mechanics wiped their hands on rags. Sales reps gathered around. Daniel introduced Jason, praised his recent volunteer work, and then before Jason could breathe, added, and this is Mrs. Hale, the investor who made this program possible. The look on Jason's face was worth every sleepless night. Surprise flickered first, then disbelief, then a dawning respect that softened the hard angles of his expression. You invested? He stammered. Only in people worth believing in, I said. Laughter rippled through the room, warm and genuine. Jason's ears flushed red, but he smiled sheepish, almost proud. Daniel handed him the keys. Drive carefully, son, and remember, Mrs. Hale's watching. Jason laughed weakly. Guess I can't show off now. You can, Daniel said. But make sure what you show is character. Outside, I climbed into the passenger seat for the ceremonial first ride. Jason adjusted the mirrors 3 times, pretending professionalism. As we pulled onto the main road, silence stretched between us until he said quietly, I still can't believe you're part of all this. I told you I knew people in high places, I teased. He shook his head, smiling. You could have told me. Would you have listened? He hesitated. Probably not. We drove in companionable quiet for a while. The town blurred past shop fronts, the park where he'd learned to ride a bike, the church where Robert and I were married. Life looked the same, but something invisible had shifted between us. When we reached a red light, Jason glanced at me. I'm sorry, Grandma. For laughing at my shoes? He winced. Yeah, I was stupid. I touched his arm. You were young, that's not the same thing. He nodded, eyes fixed on the road. Mr. Clarke said humility's the hardest gear to find. He's right, I said. But once you learn it, every road gets smoother. We spent the afternoon running small errands, grocery shopping, dropping donations at the shelter. Jason carried the heavy boxes without being asked. At each stop, people admired the car, but instead of boasting, he introduced me first. "This is my grandma. She helped make this happen." Every time he said it, pride bloomed in my chest, quiet, steady. The kind that doesn't need to shine to be seen. By evening, we returned to my house. Jason parked carefully, as though the driveway were sacred ground. He turned off the engine and sat in silence, listening to the tick of cooling metal. "Grandma," he said finally, "do you really think people can change?" I looked at him, the same boy who once laughed at cracked leather, now asking questions that mattered. "Of course. The trick is deciding who you want to be before life decides for you." He nodded slowly. "Then I want to be someone you're proud of." "You already are," I said, voice catching. Inside, as twilight stretched across the garden, I watched him from the window. He lingered by the car, running a hand over its hood. Thoughtful. The streetlights flickered on, haloing him in gold. For the first time, I saw not arrogance but possibility. And the expression on his face, the mix of humility, awe, and newfound respect, was priceless. The grandson who once mocked my shoes had finally learned to stand in his own with both feet planted firmly on the ground. Some lessons don't need punishment, only a mirror and enough light to see yourself clearly. The following week moved like the slow hum of summer. Jason came by often, no longer the whirlwind of noise that used to fill every room. He helped me carry boxes for the store, fixed the wobbly porch step, even insisted on mowing the lawn. Every small gesture felt like an apology, wordless but sincere. One afternoon, Daniel called. "How's our young driver?" "Finding second gear," I said, smiling. "Good. Let's give him a final test, something that ties everything together." Saturday found us all back at the dealership. Daniel had arranged a small ceremony to mark the official start of the sponsorship program. A few community members attended, cameras ready. Jason looked nervous in his pressed shirt, glancing at me for reassurance. Daniel addressed the group first, speaking about opportunity and responsibility. Then he turned to Jason. "Young men like you remind us that mistakes aren't the end of the road, they're just detours toward better destinations." He invited me forward. "Mrs. Hale will handle the signing of the partnership papers." I took the folder from his hand. The contract was simple: maintenance obligations, volunteer hours, community outreach. But before I signed, I looked up at Jason. "Before we put ink on these lines, I want you to answer one question," I said. "What did this experience teach you?" He met my gaze squarely. That things and people have value even when they don't look new. And that respect isn't a gift, it's a choice you keep making. Daniel nodded in approval. "Then sign here," he said, handing Jason the pen. Jason signed first, then passed the pen to me. As I added my name, the camera flash went off, capturing the moment: the grandmother who once walked away in hurt, now standing beside a grandson learning grace. After the applause, Daniel announced one more surprise. To celebrate our partnership, a portion of every sale this month will be donated to the Second Chance thrift store. The crowd clapped. Jason turned to me, eyes wide. "You knew?" I shook my head. "No, that was all Mr. Clarke." Daniel winked. Considerate interest on a priceless investment. Later, when the guests had gone, Jason lingered by the car. "Grandma, I feel like I don't deserve all this." "Maybe not yet," I said gently. "But you're earning it, one good choice at a time." He nodded, thoughtful. "You're not mad anymore, are you?" "Mad?" I smiled. "No, Jason. Disappointed once, yes. But anger fades when understanding takes its place." He looked relieved. "I'll keep volunteering, even when the month's over." "That's the best contract you'll ever sign," I said. That evening he drove me home again. The sunset painted the town gold, and for a while neither of us spoke. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "You know, Mr. Clarke told me cars depreciate the second they leave the lot." "True enough." He smiled sideways. But respect's the only thing that gains value the more you use it. I laughed softly. You've been listening after all. Yeah, he said. Guess I finally tuned into the right station. When we reached my house, he got out. First to open the door for me. Small gesture, but it made my throat tighten. Inside, I poured lemonade while he looked around the living room, taking in the old photographs and shelves crowded with second-hand treasures. These things are beautiful, he said. I never noticed before. That's because you were looking for price tags, I teased. He grinned. Guess I was shopping in the wrong store. Before leaving, he turned at the door. Grandma, thank you for not giving up on me. I touched his cheek. That's not what grandmothers do. We wait until our children and their children remember who they are. He hugged me tight, and in that moment, the distance that had stretched between us for years simply dissolved. When he drove away, the hum of his car faded down the street like the closing note of a song that finally resolved its chord. He thought a signature would end the lesson, but that day proved the ink of respect never truly dries, it keeps writing the rest of the story. You can polish pride until it shines. But the first bump in the road always shows you what it's really made of. Jason drove differently after that ceremony. Gone was the swaggering boy who revved for attention at every corner. Now he gripped the steering wheel like it carried weight, eyes steady, shoulders loose. I noticed it the first Sunday he came to pick me up for church. He parked neatly, stepped out, and waited by the door instead of honking. That, more than the shiny car, told me something had changed. As we drove, he kept the music low. It's weird, he said. I used to think silence in a car meant boredom. Now it feels peaceful. I smiled. That's because you can finally hear yourself think. He laughed quietly. Scary, isn't it? At the thrift store, he still volunteered this time without me asking. He organized shelves, carried donations, joked kindly with customers. One afternoon, a man came in looking for work boots but only had a few dollars. Without hesitation, Jason whispered, "Put the rest on my tab, Grandma." The man's grateful handshake left Jason speechless. Later he said, "That felt better than buying anything for myself." Welcome to the richest feeling in the world, I told him. But humility, like any skill, needs practice. A week later, while Jason was driving home from the store, a truck splashed mud across his spotless car. I expected him to curse, maybe jump out to inspect the paint. Instead, he pulled over, stared at the mess for a second, and burst out laughing. When he told me later, he said, "I realized it's just a car. 2 months ago, I'd have treated it like a crown. And now? Now it's just metal that gets me where I'm going." I nodded. That realization is worth more than the down payment. He started bringing his friends by the store, 2 boys who used to mock him for volunteering. "You should see what happens when people find what they need here," he told them. "It's like handing out second chances." Some stayed to help, others simply watched, maybe wondering if they could change as well. Linda noticed the difference first. "Mom," she said one evening, "Jason's calm. He even helped me with groceries without being asked. Miracles do happen," I teased. "No," she said, serious now. "You did that. You and that Mr. Clarke." I shook my head. "Life did. We just gave it the stage." At the end of the month, Daniel invited Jason to a small charity dinner celebrating the dealership's new youth program. Jason insisted I come too. When we walked in, the staff greeted him warmly. He introduced me to everyone as the reason I learned how to drive straight. During dinner, Daniel raised a toast. "To growth," he said, "and to the young man who learned that true horsepower comes from the heart." Everyone laughed, glasses clinking. Jason flushed but didn't shrink from the attention. "Thanks," he said simply. "But the real teacher's sitting right here." He nodded toward me. My eyes prickled with tears. Later that night, we drove home under a sky swollen with stars. Jason rolled down the window, letting the cool wind rush in. "Grandma," he said, "I used to think the world owed me something. Now I'm just grateful it keeps giving me chances." That's all any of us can ask for, I replied. He grinned. Guess the car came with more mileage than I thought. We both laughed, and for a long stretch of road we didn't need words at all. The hum of the tires was enough. Still, growth isn't a straight road. One evening he pulled into my driveway looking troubled. Grandma, I messed up, he said. I was late to class, cut off another driver, and she yelled something about spoiled kids in fancy cars. I wanted to yell back, but I didn't. And that, I said, is progress. He exhaled, relief flickering across his face. I wanted to, though. Of course you did. Restraint doesn't erase anger, it just teaches it manners. He laughed, shaking his head. You always have the last word. Only until you learn to use yours wisely, I said. By autumn the leaves had turned gold, and the thrift store windows were painted with pumpkins. Jason helped set up a donation drive for winter coats, organizing it entirely on his own. When I asked why, he shrugged. Because I can. Watching him hand out flyers, I realized something. He no longer moved through life needing applause. He was becoming quiet like the man who had taught me this lesson, Robert. That thought filled me with a sweet ache. The day he finally paid off the first small installment on his car, he stopped by my house, receipt in hand. One payment down, he announced. Proud of you, I said. Feels good, he admitted. Better than showing it off ever did. Then you've truly earned it. He paused. Grandma, I think I finally get what you meant when you said comfort matters more than show. These shoes I'm wearing? I bought them secondhand. I laughed out loud. Now that's irony worth framing. He grinned, holding up his sneakers. Guess I'm walking in your footsteps now. I looked at his face in the porch light, at the humility resting where arrogance used to live, and my heart felt lighter than it had in years. The boy who once laughed at my shoes had learned to stand tall in his own, and every road he took from then on began with respect. Sometimes the strongest apology isn't spoken through words, it's seen in the way someone finally looks you in the eye. It happened on an ordinary Wednesday. The thrift store was quiet. Rain pressed against the windows like a steady heartbeat. I was sorting a box of donated coats when the bell above the door jingled. I looked up and saw Jason standing there, soaked to the bone, his hair plastered to his forehead. In his hands he held the shoes he'd been wearing, mud-spattered, laces limp. Grandma, he said softly. I think I finally understand. He set the shoes on the counter as if they were something fragile. My first instinct was worry. Jason, what on earth happened? You look like you ran through a storm. I did, he said, voice shaking with a laugh that wasn't quite laughter. The car broke down on the old highway. I was halfway home from class. No signal, no one around. I started walking. He paused, eyes glistening. Every step hurt, and I kept thinking about you, about those shoes I laughed at. I handed him a towel. Sit down before you catch pneumonia. He dropped onto the stool, wiping his face. I thought I could handle everything on my own. Then I saw this old couple pulled over with a flat tire. I wanted to help, but my phone was dead, and my fancy shoes were full of water. They offered me a ride instead. He swallowed, hard. They didn't know me, didn't owe me anything. They just saw someone who needed help. I felt tears sting the back of my eyes. And they reminded you what kindness looks like. He nodded. Yeah. They drove me to the next station. On the way, the man told me he used to work 2 jobs to keep his family fed. His wife said she shops at your store every week. They had nothing fancy, but they were happy. I don't remember the last time I felt that way. He looked up at me, eyes wet. Grandma, I've been such a fool. I reached across the counter and took his cold hands. No, sweetheart, you've just been learning the hard way. He shook his head. You should have yelled at me months ago. I smiled. And what good would that have done? You'd have shut your ears. Sometimes, silence is the only language pride understands. When the rain eased, I brewed tea while he sat near the window, watching drops slide down the glass. Do you know what's strange? He said. The whole time I was walking, I kept thinking about your shoes. I wondered how many miles they'd walked. How many times you kept going even when it hurt. They've seen a few storms, I said, joining him with 2 steaming cups. He looked down at the borrowed slippers I'd given him. You never complained, you just kept showing up for everyone. That's what family does. He exhaled. I'm sorry for every cruel thing I said, for the post, for treating you like you were less than me. I touched his cheek. Apology accepted. But don't say less than you, just say different from you. We all walk at our own pace. He smiled weakly. Still, I want to make it right. Maybe start by buying you new shoes? I laughed. If you insist, but only if we pick them together. He chuckled, the sound lighter than I'd heard in years. Deal. A few days later we went shopping. He drove, cautious on the wet roads. The shoe store smelled of leather and polish. Sunlight slanted across neat rows of boxes. He kept pulling out pairs, some elegant, some absurdly shiny, and asking, how about these? Finally, I found a simple pair of black loafers. These feel like me, I said. He grinned. Classic and unstoppable. At the register, he handed over his card before I could argue. Consider it tuition for the lessons you've been giving me. When we stepped outside, he knelt on the sidewalk to lace my new shoes himself, ignoring the puzzled looks from passers-by. There, he said, standing up. Now we're even. I shook my head. Not even, but balanced. That evening we visited Daniel at the dealership to thank him. He listened quietly as Jason told the story of the breakdown and the couple who helped him. When Jason finished, Daniel said, the universe has a sense of humor, it knows when to pop a tire and when to mend a heart. Jason laughed. Guess it fixed both today. Daniel looked at him fondly. I'd say you're roadworthy now. Driving home, Jason reached over and turned off the radio. Grandma, he said, I don't want to just say sorry anymore. I want to live sorry. I want to do better every day. That's how real change works, I told him. It's not a sentence, it's a lifetime. He nodded, eyes on the glowing horizon. Then here's to the rest of it. That night, as I watched his car disappear down the street, I felt a peace I hadn't known since Robert was alive. My grandson had finally found his way not through my scolding, but through his own footsteps. The rain began again, soft and rhythmic. I looked down at my new shoes and smiled. They shone faintly in the porch light, already marked with the first traces of mud, proof that even fresh starts get messy. He'd broken down on the side of the road, but what truly stopped him that day wasn't the car. It was pride, and from its ashes, humility finally took the wheel. Sometimes gratitude arrives wrapped in leather and tied with memories. A week after the breakdown, life slipped back into its quieter rhythm. The mornings were cool again. The garden smelled of damp earth and marigolds. I was folding donated sweaters at the store when the bell over the door chimed and a delivery man stepped inside, carrying a long, narrow box tied with silver ribbon. Mrs. Hale? He asked. Package for you, signature required. I frowned, surprised. My birthday was months away. I signed, thanked him, and carried the box to the counter. Jason was in the back organizing shelves. When he saw the ribbon, he grinned. Secret admirer? Hardly, I said, though my heart fluttered with curiosity. I untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a pair of handcrafted black leather shoes, gleaming yet simple. A folded note rested on top. For the woman whose steps changed a man's path. D. Clarke. My throat tightened. Jason picked up one shoe, turning it gently in his hands. He sent you these? They're beautiful. He has good taste, I managed. The shoes fit perfectly, soft and solid, as if made for the miles I'd already walked. Jason's eyes softened. You should wear them when we go thank him. That evening we drove to the dealership. Daniel was finishing paperwork when we arrived. I hoped you'd get them today, he said, smiling. Consider it my way of saying thank you for reminding me why I started all this in the first place. I told him they were far too fine a gift. He waved off the protest. They're just shoes, Margaret. The real gift was watching your grandson change. Jason extended his hand. You taught me more than engines and deals, sir. You taught me respect. Daniel shook his hand firmly. No, you learned it yourself. I just gave you the steering wheel. We sat in his office for coffee, the three of us talking like family. Daniel outlined his next project, a youth mentorship program, combining business skills with community service. "We need someone young to help shape it," he said, looking at Jason. My grandson straightened. "I'd like that." Daniel nodded. "Then you're hired unpaid, of course." Jason laughed. "Best offer I've had all year." When we left, the dealership lights shimmered behind us. Jason looked over at me. "You realize, Grandma, you started all this. The volunteering, the donations, the mentorships. Mr. Clarke said the program wouldn't exist without your example." I squeezed his hand. "One person can't change the world, Jason, but she can change her corner of it." He smiled, eyes shining. "Then I'm glad I get to live in your corner." At home, he helped me carry in groceries before heading out again. As I watched his car disappear, I slipped off the old loafers and put on Daniel's gift. The leather molded instantly to my feet, warm and firm. I walked to the porch, feeling the cool wood beneath the soles, and whispered, "Thank you, Robert. You'd have liked him now." The stars blinked awake one by one. I thought of the long road that had brought us here. The laughter that once stung. The silence that healed. The humility that grew between us like wildflowers after rain. The next morning, Jason arrived early with a camera. "Before you say anything," he announced, "I promised Mr. Clarke we'd take photos for the mentorship site." I groaned but obliged, standing in front of the thrift store's faded sign. He took several shots, then one of me walking away, the new shoes gleaming against cracked pavement. "Perfect," he said. "That's what this whole story's about moving forward." He showed me the picture later, my back straight, sunlight flaring on the shoes, the store behind me glowing with quiet pride. I felt tears rise. "That's not just me," I said softly. "That's every woman who's ever kept walking when someone laughed at her." Jason nodded. "Then maybe we should hang it inside the store. Call it Steps of Respect." I laughed through my tears. "You and your ideas." "Come on, Grandma," he said. "It'll remind people what we stand for." So we framed it and hung it above the counter. Customers noticed, asked about the story, and Jason would smile and say, "It's a long walk but worth every mile." That evening he joined me for dinner. Linda stopped by too, bringing dessert and the news that Jason had been offered a part-time position at Daniel's company. "He wants to balance work and school," she said proudly. Watching them together, I felt something settle inside me, a peace that had been waiting its turn for years. After dinner, Jason leaned back in his chair, content. "You know, Grandma, maybe those new shoes mean it's your turn to rest." I shook my head. "Not rest, just walk slower. There's still work to do." The shoes Daniel gave me were beautiful, but the real gift was the man my grandson had become and the road ahead waiting for both of us. Sometimes the people we take for granted don't change at all, we just finally open our eyes enough to see them. After Daniel's gift, and the new mentorship program began, the days that followed carried a quiet joy I hadn't felt in years. The thrift store buzzed with more visitors than ever, thanks to the charity work Jason helped organize. He stopped by every afternoon, sometimes in his crisp internship clothes, sometimes in worn jeans, always wearing that calm confidence I'd prayed he'd find. "You've been on your feet all day," he told me. "Dinner's on me." Nina nearly dropped the register. "Your grandson's spoiling us now, Margaret," she said, laughing. I smiled and watched him hand out meals, greeting every volunteer by name. He fit here now, not above anyone, not apart from us, but with us. At home, our dinners turned into long conversations instead of hurried bites between phone calls. Linda joined us often, her laughter filling the spaces that used to echo with silence. One night she confessed, "Mom, I think I was too hard on him. I wanted him to succeed so badly that I forgot to teach him why kindness matters." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You taught him everything you could. Life handled the rest." Jason looked up from his plate. "You both did. I just wasn't listening." When autumn deepened, we started spending weekends together in my garden. Jason fixed the squeaky gate, rebuilt the birdhouse, and even helped me plant tulip bulbs for spring. One Saturday, he showed up with paint cans. "We're giving this place a facelift," he announced. He painted the fence a soft cream color while I trimmed roses. By sunset, the backyard glowed. "There," he said, admiring our work. "Your garden deserves to look as proud as you are." I laughed, shaking my head. "You're turning into quite the poet," he smiled. "Maybe kindness makes people creative." As weeks passed, I noticed something even more remarkable. Jason began inviting friends over to help. Boys who once mocked me now hammered nails, planted flowers, and left with dirt under their fingernails and something new in their hearts. They said volunteering's not as boring as they thought, Jason told me, amused. "I think they like feeling useful." "Everyone does," I said. "Even the ones who pretend they don't." On Thanksgiving, the three of us, Linda, Jason, and I, decided to host dinner at my house. It was the first family meal here in years. Linda handled the turkey, Jason took charge of decorations, and I made my old-fashioned cobbler. When everything was ready, we sat around the small dining table, candles flickering between us. Jason raised his glass. "To family," he said softly, "and to learning that love's more important than pride." Linda blinked back tears. "I'll drink to that." I did too. Though my throat ached with emotion, the meal was filled with laughter, gentle teasing, and old stories. At one point, Jason looked around and said, "This feels like home again," I whispered. "It always was, you just forgot the address." Later that night, after the dishes were done and Linda had gone home, Jason stayed behind to help me tidy up. As he carried a stack of plates to the kitchen, he stopped and looked at an old photo hanging by the doorway. Robert in his overalls, holding a baby Jason on his shoulder. "He'd be proud of you," Jason said quietly. "You think so?" I asked. "I know it," he said. The air was crisp, stars scattered across the sky like 1,000 tiny promises. Jason leaned on the railing beside me. "I used to think success meant being the loudest in the room," he said. "Now I think it's about who you're standing next to when the noise fades." I nodded, heart swelling. "Then you've already made it." From that night on, family became more than a word again. It was an action. Something we did together. Jason started visiting his mother more often, surprising her with coffee before work. Linda called me every morning just to say hello. We found our rhythm again, 3 generations finally walking in step. At the thrift store, Jason suggested we create a small community garden in the empty lot next door. "Something that gives back every season," he explained. With Daniel's help, we made it happen. Local kids helped plant seeds. Seniors stopped by to water them. By spring, the lot was alive with color. A small wooden sign read, "Hale Family Garden, growing with gratitude." One afternoon, as we stood admiring the blooming tulips, Jason slipped an arm around my shoulders. "You know, Grandma, I used to see you as the past. Now I realize you're the reason. We have a future." My eyes stung with tears, but I smiled. "You just needed new lenses, sweetheart." He no longer saw me as a woman in old shoes. He finally saw the footsteps that carried our whole family forward. When a lesson becomes a story, and that story inspires others, you know it's come full circle. Spring arrived early that year. The tulips in our garden flared red and gold, and the thrift store window overflowed with donations. Daniel's mentorship program was thriving. Every week, new young volunteers came through the door, eager to learn and to serve. Jason had become their quiet leader, never barking orders, just setting the example. Sometimes I would catch him kneeling beside a student, showing how to polish old shoes or explain why we price things by fairness, not fashion. Watching him made my heart ache in the sweetest way. He no longer moved like a boy chasing attention. He moved like a man who finally knew his worth. One afternoon, Daniel called with unexpected news. "Margaret," he said, "we've been invited to speak at the city's annual charity gala about the mentorship project. I want you and Jason there. He's going to be our keynote speaker." I laughed out loud. "Jason? A keynote speaker? He'll faint before he finishes the first sentence." Daniel chuckled. Not this, Jason. You'll see. The night of the gala. The ballroom shimmered under crystal lights. I wore a soft blue dress and Daniel's gifted shoes, polished until they caught the glow like black mirrors. Jason met us by the entrance, adjusting his tie nervously. You look perfect, I said. And terrified. Both true, he admitted. If I trip, I'm blaming these fancy shoes. I smiled. Then let them carry you with honesty, that's all anyone wants to hear. When it was his turn, he stepped onto the stage, paper trembling slightly in his hands. But once he started speaking, the tremor disappeared. A year ago, he began. I thought success came from what you could buy. I thought respect was something people gave you for showing off. But then life and a very patient grandmother taught me that respect is earned by what you give, not what you own. The room fell silent, drawn into his voice. He told the story from his side, the laughter, the embarrassment, the volunteering, the lesson about humility. I felt the crowd lean forward, tears glinting under the chandeliers. He ended with, everything I am becoming started with one simple truth. Dignity never goes out of style. Then he looked straight at me and said, my grandmother taught me that. She walked through life in the same pair of shoes until the world caught up to her pace. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Cameras flashed. Applause rolled like thunder. I pressed a hand to my chest, overwhelmed. Daniel leaned toward me and whispered, you see? Legacy has a heartbeat. After the speech, reporters crowded around Jason, asking for interviews. He handled them gracefully, giving credit to everyone but himself. It's her story, he said, pointing toward me. I just got lucky enough to walk in it. Someone asked for a photo of us together. We posed side by side, his arm around my shoulder. For a second, I saw not just pride but reverence in his eyes. Later, as the crowd thinned and the music softened, Daniel tapped his glass for attention. Before we close, he announced, our mentorship foundation would like to honor the woman whose steps inspired this entire journey. He motioned for me to come forward. My knees nearly gave out as I climbed the stage. This isn't necessary, I whispered, but he shook his head. It's overdue. He unveiled a small plaque. Eleanor's Steps program. He'd chosen to use my full name for the official title. Gasps and applause filled the room. Jason hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. Grandma, it's you. They named it after you. I laughed through tears. And you helped me earn it. When the gala ended and we walked outside, the night air felt cool and infinite. Jason carried the plaque to the car like it was made of glass. I can't believe this, he said. You're a legend now. Legends are just people who keep showing up, I replied. You're halfway there yourself. He grinned. Maybe someday I'll get my own plaque. You already did, I said, tapping his chest. Right there. Back home. We hung the plaque in the thrift store above the picture Jason had taken months ago, me walking away in Daniel's shoes, sunlight on my back. Customers stopped to stare, reading the inscription, smiling. It felt right, as if the story had folded in on itself perfectly, the laughter that began in cruelty ending in applause for compassion. That evening I wrote one last note in my journal. Respect once felt like something I had to demand. Now I know it's something you grow by giving it away. I closed the book, placed it beside Robert's photo and whispered, we did it, love. The boy found his road. The house was quiet except for the wind through the garden. I could almost hear Robert's chuckle in it, proud and light. The respect I once longed for had come full circle, not shouted, not bought, but spoken softly through the life of the man who finally understood where he came from. Every journey leaves footprints, but only a few leave paths for others to follow. A full year passed after that night at the gala. The thrift store stood brighter than ever, its windows filled with color from the community garden next door. Children came to plant seeds, retirees came to tell stories, young people came to find purpose. Whenever I watched them, I saw a reflection of my own journey, how life had taken something small, a pair of worn shoes and a moment of hurt, and turned it into something vast enough to hold an entire town's compassion. Jason still worked part-time with Daniel, balancing school and mentorship duties. He'd become a local name, invited to schools to speak about humility and respect. Every time he gave a talk, he'd start with the same line. My grandmother taught me that character doesn't wear out, it just needs polishing. Parents would nod, teachers would smile, and I would sit quietly in the back, pretending I wasn't crying. At home, our lives had settled into a rhythm of peace. Linda's visits were frequent, filled with laughter and fresh stories from work. Jason dropped by every Sunday morning with coffee and a newspaper. He'd read headlines aloud, making witty comments, while I baked cobbler or watered the garden. Sometimes he'd sneak glances at my shoes now, Daniel's handcrafted pair, scuffed at the toes from all my walking, and grin. You ever think how it all started with those old loafers? He asked once. Every day, I said, and I thank them for surviving the miles. He laughed. Guess they deserve a spot in a museum. They're already in one, I told him, nodding toward the thrift store window where my old shoes sat on display, framed under glass. The plaque beneath read, "The shoes that changed everything." It was Jason's idea to place them there. People should remember that change can start from something as simple as choosing kindness, he'd said. One afternoon, a young woman came into the shop holding her toddler's hand. She stopped in front of the display, eyes wide. Are those really yours? She asked. They are, I said, smiling. They've seen better days. The woman shook her head. They've seen brave ones. I read about your family in the paper. I came here to volunteer. My heart swelled. We'll find you a pair of gloves and plenty of work, I said. She laughed and joined Jason at the sorting table. Watching them side by side, I felt something inside me settle into the gentlest kind of joy, the kind that doesn't shout. It just hums softly, saying, "This is enough." One evening, Jason drove me to the hilltop overlooking town. The city lights shimmered below. The same skyline that once made him restless now just looked peaceful. He turned off the engine and said, "Grandma, do you ever miss how things were?" I thought about it for a moment. "No," I said. "Because everything we lost brought us here." He nodded. "You know, I used to think I was teaching my friends how to drive safely. Turns out you were teaching me how to live safely." I smiled. "And you're teaching me that even old souls can keep learning." We sat in silence for a while, watching the lights flicker. Then Jason reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small box. "Before you say anything," he said quickly, "this isn't about replacing anything. It's about remembering." I opened the box and found a delicate silver charm shaped like a tiny shoe, engraved with the words, "Keep walking." My throat tightened. "Jason, it's beautiful. It's a reminder," he said softly. "For everything you taught me and for everything I still have to learn." That night, as I placed the charm beside Robert's photo, I thought about how life had circled back to Grace. I'd started as a woman invisible in her own family and ended up as the heart of it. The laughter that once cut so sharply had become the rhythm of our joy. The shoes that once embarrassed my grandson now stood as a symbol of everything he believed in. It's strange, the way time heals slowly, quietly, like rain softening stone until it becomes something smooth enough to hold in your hands. A few months later, the city announced a new initiative inspired by Daniel's mentorship program. They called it the Second Step Project, aimed at helping young people rebuild their paths through community work. Jason was chosen as its coordinator. At the opening ceremony, he stood at the podium, in front of hundreds of people, wearing the same calm expression I'd once seen on his grandfather's face. "This program," he said, "exists because someone believed that kindness could outlast anger." Then he looked down at me in the front row and smiled. She was right. After the event, he walked me to the garden where tulips swayed in the breeze. "Grandma," he said, "do you realize your story has changed more lives than you'll ever meet?" I looked at him, tall and steady in the fading light, and whispered, "I never wanted to change the world, Jason. I just wanted you to see me." He took my hand. "I do, Grandma. I see you now clearer than ever." That night, as I wrote the final entry in my journal, I thought of every step that had led us here, the cobbler's scent of home, the sting of laughter, the grace of forgiveness, the long road between pride and humility. Keep walking, I wrote beneath it, then closed the book for the last time. The boy who once mocked my worn shoes had grown into a man whose footsteps carried my story forward, and those simple shoes, long past their years, had changed everything.